first of all, thank you so much for CXC for having this discussion and having us all here. But I mean, how wonderful that it gets to spotlight such an incredible book. So thank you, Columbus. Thank you, CXC. Like, this is amazing. Because this is a weird book.
Yeah.
And it's not a book that is oftentimes going to be spotlighted in certain kind of mainstream settings. So how did you all come up with the concept, and how would you what was your elevator pitch when you were sort of, approaching publishers and sort of, yeah.
Well, it's so interesting. My beloved KQED from the Bay Area did refer to it as the most bizarre graphic novel of the year. Which made my year. It's just the normal goings on of my twisted mind, and I guess Lisa's too, which is why we're a good match. But yeah, the elevator pitch is that it is hard-boiled detective fiction about a queer leather dyke, a word I'm allowed to use because I am one. Not a hard-boiled detective, but who was raised in a cult, a bizarre cult, the most bizarre cult of the year, and escaped that cult and now specializes in rescuing and deprogramming, thus Deprog, people who are in all kinds of cults. And it takes place in Southern California. And yeah, it is, it's definitely for adults in the sense of it being sexually mature, and yeah, it has ultra violence and a lot of taboo, a lot of explorations of a lot of taboos. But yeah, that, to me, that feels, some of the reviewers have been like, I was surprised that there was a lot of exploration of taboo in this. And I was like, well, you need to read more about cults then.
Yeah, right.
Because that, I mean, that's sort of one of the things that we explore is the way that cults are basically like organized groups that function in very similar way to interpersonal abusive relationships. And BDSM, which is part of what is celebrated at Folsom Street Fair and is an enormous part of my personal and professional life. To me, one of the most beautiful things about BDSM is that it's a culturally like a counterculturally designed framework for exploring power and taboo and pleasure and fetish and all kinds of different things in a way that people have the opportunity to negotiate and advocate for themselves and provide care to not only even the people they're playing with, but their communities and culture at large, and making art also about those explorations of power and pleasure, which is what Deprog is. That was a long elevator ride, I guess. It was an elevator to hell. Yeah.
I couldn't have said it any better.
And Lisa, how did you come onto the project?
So I believe you had already hooked up with Dead Sky because you knew Steve.
Yes, Steve is the longtime letterer of my other series, SfSx, which is on Image. So that was a beautiful moment of having a great collaborator in one of the many kinds of people that you collaborate with in comics, and then to have my longtime lettering collaborator start an imprint and really do it the indie way of like reaching out to me and asking for a pitch, and I pitched him Deprog, and then I pitched him a bunch of artists that I wanted to work with, and Lisa was at the top of the list, and Steve actually did the emailing for me, which as a longtime DIYer, I was like, you what?
And he did a great job pitching me the story because I was immediately on board. I think there were a few like references and temp poles that were like the tone and vibe that other things that inspired you, which is often in a pitch doc. And I remember there was like Big Lebowski and Inherent Vice. I don't remember if Dead Ringers was in there. I know Jessica Jones was.
Yeah, definitely.
And the way that you described this kind of mishmash of just queer kink and cult detective noir. I was like, this is the most amazingly bizarre mashup. And I was so intrigued from the story. And then I thought about it and I was like, you know, a lot of my books so far, before Deprog at least, had been mostly like YA / like new adult. I had never, up until Deprog, had never done anything quite like this. I don't think I ever will again, really. It's very unique. But I wanted to challenge myself for sure to write this kind of, and draw this kind of bizarre story.
Well, I mean, we are co-creators, and that was very special to me also, to be able to develop it with a visual artist.
Yeah, because you had written probably the beat sheet and like the pitch, but you hadn't started writing the issues. So and that was really exciting actually, because a lot of times, especially in graphic novels, it happens more often in serialized comics, but a lot of times the script will already be written, like totally done by the time it gets to me. So which is fine. But I like having the opportunity to be there at the beginning and talk about kind of what like visual ideas I have, what kind of like things about the story stand out to me, and like environments, set pieces, kind of the vibe, tone, setting, time, place, whatever. I like to be there at the beginning whenever I can to kind of, so it does feel like a very collaborative effort from the very start. Totally. And not like I'm just like a hired hand. So
and when that synergy is like, I mean, you can feel that when the sort of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Like, I mean, that's really a wonderful moment. There's also a cover artist here. So who was the cover artist to this work?
Danny is so good, and the whole art team was a
Fantastic.
Real dream come true for me to get to collaborate with. I met Danny at my first Comic-Con, my first New York Comic-Con as a creator when SfSx was just getting started, and she lives in Athens, Greece, and is just so prolific and also such a sweet person. And
absolutely,
and we had in like deep pandemic, like summer 2020, we had a Zoom call about maybe collaborating on like something nascent in this in the sort of vein of what became Deprog, and she was like, well, I'm booked with this book through I think like 2022, but then there's this other thing until like I think like today. And I was like, cool, maybe you can do covers one day for this. And then she responded right away.
The absolute perfect cover artist. Like,
totally.
Like when you think noir, you think strong contrast, shadows, that blacks and whites, and she's the master of that. So,
and our colorist is Gab Contras, and she colored Danny's covers and also
as well
Lisa's.
as the interior art. Yeah, Gab. I've worked with Gab on a multitude of projects, and she's also an amazing collaborator. She's the kind of colorist and artist that is, like I said, much like Tina, like is like, okay, what are your guys' visions? Here's some of my ideas. I think I remember sending, like, I'm trying to remember some of the visual, like color schemes, but it was a lot of like dusty gold deserts, and maybe I remember Paris, Texas, which had some great colors, was in there. Wim Wender's photography. Definitely wanted a kind of like sun-baked vibe for sure. But yeah.
Thank you. That's so let's see if this works. Yeah, here we go. So this is one in the first issue. It establishes the characters here, Tate and Vera, so the main characters, and their relationship, which seems really fun. I mean, it's clearly a lot of fun to write this sort of banter between them, and also in terms of the illustration, there's a sort of body language that they have with each other. So I'm wondering about developing that relationship. Like, how did that work for you all? Was this a sort of cornerstone of the book, thinking about that relationship?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a sort of hyper masculine or particular kind of hyper-masculine, hard-boiled detective being so attracted to the femme who hires them that they're like not seeing that they're so competent, right? It like detective fiction often is like competence porn, right? Where you're just like, oh, this person can like walk into a room and like find out what they need to find out by like looking at little clues or like grilling someone and never experiencing any consequences, which is fun, wish fulfillment. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to pay tribute to the genderqueer femmes in my life and the particular way that femme manifests for queer people, whatever sex or gender they were assigned at birth, and like femme as a gender that is very performative and fits into the kind of like maximalist, campy genre of the hard-boiled detective, and queer it up a little bit with that butch femme dynamic. And the thing that I love about that in the crime and noir genre is that I feel like sex work in those genres, sex works the way that I always want it to work, which is that people walk into a room and they're like, we want to fuck. So obviously. So let's just like get to it, a little banter, and then like straight to the sack. And we'll solve the mystery along the way or not. And that was kind of fun. And the dialogue, I mean, I think that this is something that I've said about the character Stacy in Volume 2 of SfSx Terms of Service, who is a sex robot. I really do think that my background in sex work has really helped me to write characters in genre fiction, because I just kind of go into that mode of like being in the room with horny people and just being like, what do horny people say and want to hear? That it's just one of my talents.
Well, that's role play, right? I mean, and role play is sort of an avenue towards good writing, oftentimes, right? Because you're sort of improving scenes. It's sort of like, I don't know, writers who play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons oftentimes are really good writers, you know, and people I think who create scenes, and kinksters who create scenes can oftentimes they have that sort of imagination in order to create the world building and the character development that leads to really good scripting. So I'm curious about like the body language here is so, you know, sort of distinct. Like you've got this sort of the butch sort of like leaning over the femme, but then the femme has got this sort of, you know, is not cowed at all. Like how did you sort of think about?
I mean, I would say in pretty much all of my comics work, it is the interpersonal character relationships that I love to explore the most. I mean, action is fun, and like I can draw a background when I have to, but I love characters. I love the subtlety of expression and body language, and like what a like you know, intentionally placed lingering hand wherever it happens to be, what that means, and the subtext there. So there's definitely a lot of intentional thought behind that. And their character design too, like as far as identity goes, we designed the characters together, and another thing I love is fashion and how that is a part of creating identity. And so it's fun to explore, like, you know, more masc and femme like fashion choices in Vera and Tate. And also one of the things on that note that I remember we were discussing is like, I mean, the fashion choices in particular in this book are kind of not necessarily modern. They're kind of a more, you know, 70s influenced, which was an intentional choice to kind of create a more anachronistic time and place. You know, there are cell phones in the story, but there are also, they don't necessarily dress the way that you might expect. So yeah.
Well, that's also like consciously referenced. I mean, in the script, and you talked about, you know, referencing exploitation films and sort of that 70s era, and then that comes out in the, So
absolutely. It all came together though.
Yeah, you can see some of the we had fun because Tate's office is in the back of a video store, which is both a tribute to how much time I spent in deep quarantine, just like listening to really broy movie podcasts. That was like what got me through. But then also, speaking of broy movies and books, Inherent Vice, the Thomas Pynchon novel that Paul Thomas Anderson made, which you brought up, and even like, you know, some of the references are definitely the classics of like Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett. But then, yeah, there is this particular strain of detective, the like shaggy dog detective, I guess, who is like kind of stoned or and like kind of bumbling, but then also seems to somehow like also always like fuck beautiful women and solve the mystery. So that's, you know, that's wish fulfillment for me too. But yeah, we put a lot of the like a lot of cult movies and a few there's a few movies in the video store that are a little bit of foreshadowing some of the themes of the cult, which was also fun.
I love doing those little Easter eggs / foreshadowing symbols.
And like homages and like showing our influences on our sleeve.
It's funny that you mentioned, I don't think I ever actually talked about this. It's funny that you mentioned that you were, listening to a lot of broy movie podcasts during quarantine, because a big reason why I love designing all the posters in the movie store is the video store is shortly after, well, actually it was pretty much during quarantine, but you know how we all kind of decided to make pods of people when we needed to like socialize, and we're like, we'll only see like these 6 people, and so we'll keep it contained and not, you know, that turned into a movie night, that double feature movie night. We all take turns picking movies. We get together in our friend's basement every Tuesday. We've been doing it since 2020. It's still going. It's still going. And so a lot of the movies that we watched also made an appearance in the the backgrounds and the posters. So I mean, I love film. So yeah, I just thought that was funny.
I wanted to show this next scene, which there's obviously sort of a big, sort of shocking, potentially shocking image of Tate, but also I think to reference what we were just talking about, there's this interesting reversal of power dynamics, right? Where Tate is the butch dyke and seems to have power over over Vera, the femme, but in fact Tate is the masochist and Vera is the dom. So who knew, right? How shocking, right? So I'm curious about that, about how you sort of imagined that reversal and sort of leading the reader down, if you wanted a sort of reversal for the reader's expectations.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I was excited about with ending issue 1 in a sex club, a BDSM club, is that, I mean, I feel like my readers would have protested if we didn't include that. So that's what they come to me for, I hope. And getting to collaborate on that with Lisa was really fun, and talk about like just like what are the movies in the background of the video store, like what are the scenes happening in the background of the sex party. There's so much potential for rich symbolism there for exactly the reason that you were saying, Justin, that there's a lot of potential meaning in role plays. I mean, fetishes are all about symbolism, and so I wanted to do that. And there are so many examples. I could list so many of films. I mean, the entire movie Cruising is an example of this. Of like the sex club represents someone's elevator to hell. Their like descent into depravity and like losing control and being alienated and isolated, and or a sign that like something is wrong with them. One that comes to mind for me actually was in Killing Eve, which was like otherwise had such a great queer sensibility and sensibility even about like the fact that like murder can be kind of gay if you do it right.
That is the takeaway line from this.
But yeah, then there's a scene where like Villanelle, who is a psychopath, is in a sex club, and that's like the camera literally like goes down like a dark alley and then like down it like inside of like a pothole or something. There's like a trap door, and it's like, oh no, now she's been murdered. She's a hired assassin, but like now she's at a sex club, so that's really bad. Or even San Junipero. Anyway, there's so many examples of like otherwise great queer media, and I'm sure I could think of comics examples as well, where BDSM is like shorthand for like, oh no. And so we really wanted to defy that and say like, actually this is a scene where maybe the descent is a little bit like a descent into seeing more of Tate's inner life, right. But also like BDSM is healing from trauma, and the club is called Trauma, but like very much, and this comes up later in the story, the idea that like the part of the genius of being queer is like community and culture and pleasure, and sometimes pain as pleasure, being a way to take power back that has been taken from you by society or abusers or like any number of other oppressive forces. So we wanted to do that, and like hopefully it's also fun and scandalous, I guess.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun drawing it, that's for sure.
well, I did want. I mean, because one of the things that's so wonderful about this book is that you're also showing different kinds of bodies, and spoiler alert, like women's bodies are different from each other. Like there's actually not one. It's not like the superhero comics. So I'm wondering about how you sort of approached designing the characters in terms of bodies, in terms of body shapes, and then displaying them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's something that I have made a concerted effort to do for a long time, especially in comics, because not all women's bodies look like either, people on Instagram or the, female protagonists of superhero comics. Yep. So I just... when I am designing a body, I look at the people around me, the people that I love, the people that I see every day who I think are all beautiful and gorgeous in their differences or similarities, and all their different types of body shapes. Yep. And I want them to see themselves on pages and see themselves represented beautifully, and in a real way and not in a glamorized way. So, Thank
you for your service. And also, I really do appreciate just the sort of creation of the sex club as in a way that's like both celebratory but also feels authentic and realistic. And as to your point earlier, that's more rare. Yeah, exactly. Tax deductible.
Oh man.
For sure. So to sort of reference what you were saying before, this idea about how BDSM can be healing, sort of from trauma, that there's the idea of catharsis. So if you could maybe elaborate more on that concept and then how that plays into the story here.
Yeah, I mean, something that is also important to me is that you don't have to prove that you're healing from trauma in order to enjoy kinky sex. You can do it because it feels good. You can do it because it's fun. You can do it because you know that it will scandalize people and piss people off, and that it's bad and wrong. And like, if you're enjoying it for that reason, I also endorse that. But for many people, I can say it's anecdotally true, and there's been a lot of literature and media and podcasting created around, and in-person conversation as well, created around this idea of using BDSM as a healing tool. And there's also been scientific and social science and clinical studies, and there are more people talking about that, and crucially more like care providers who are educated in the reality of that and are able to offer at the very least support that might be something that you're doing, that they have a context, that a care provider, like a mental health provider, like a therapist, would be able to say, that sounds good, instead of, I'm worried about you. And so as I said before, part of the reason that I'm interested in cults is that it's fascinating to me to see some of the same sort of psychological elements that I work with in my career as a professional dominatrix, and my career creating all kinds of BDSM fantasy and fiction, and then also in my personal life, off the clock. But then I see in cults some of the same like psychological dynamics, just without consent. And so I've explored that a little bit in my nonfiction, and then I really wanted to, it just seemed like such an endless like psychological material to play with, like for a fiction, a piece of fiction, and also potentially a fiction series, because even though we know how cults operate and we know how abusive like interpersonal relationships operate, we also know how some of those tactics work on like the level of the state. That certainly other institutions, medical institutions, religious institutions, that are even bigger than cults. Anyway, we keep falling for it. So there's something so fascinating to me about the fact that that humans can study something, and that there are these needs that we have for belonging, meaning, purpose, et cetera, that we are still drawn in to these things. And I'll close by saying that what I've always said is that I believe that a cult would never get me, and the most important thing for me to accept and have humility around is that that's how they would get me.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone thinks that they wouldn't be taken in by a cult, and yet, I mean, deprogramming is a real thing.
It is a real thing.
Yeah, it's not fictional. Like, there are people whose job it is to, deprogram people from cult mindsets, because that's how powerful it can be. To take those, like, desires for community and belonging and have it be utilized against you as a weapon.
So cruel.
I know.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely nothing in our current political environment that has anything to do with any of that. So, another thing I want to, that sort of is brought up in this scene, though, is this idea, sort of as cults as sort of inversions of the sort of the classic queer trope of the found family, which is such a positive, wonderful thing, and cults are sort of like the dark flip side of that, in a weird way. So yeah, I'm wondering if you sort of thought about, the idea of found family as a sort of cults as a twisted version of that.
I mean, that's a great observation. I maybe didn't think about that consciously. So that is what's so cool about talking to people about your work. I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is that, my parents met in a cult. My parents were Moonies.
I wanted this.
And I didn't find that out until I was in my mid-20s. So I grew up not knowing this fact. They left before I was born, and by the time I found out that my parents had met in a cult and been involved in this Unification Church, which has weird sex stuff in it, which you can Google or read about in books. But by the time I found that out, I was already working as a professional dominatrix and like getting turned out in the San Francisco leather scene, as a leather dyke, and so I was already like, okay, this explains a lot. But then, like I said before, the sort of dynamic of like, okay, what is the relationship between like maybe part of how the legacy of how my parents were still thinking about all of these things and how I was raised, and then like why I was attracted to something where you get to like co-design all of these things and explore them in scenes. And I guess the other thing I'll say about it is that I'm very I support the idea of chosen family and think that it's wonderful, and certainly have people that I call my chosen family. But I'm also very allergic to the fact that a lot of queer people will like talk to you for 5 minutes at the Eagle and then be like, "We're family." I'm like, "We're not." You're here. Your family is not true in my house, you know, because I feel like I need to like be ready to like kill for you and die for you before I call you family, and vice versa. And so that actually means something to me. So it being kind of like people being like, "Girl, I love you." I'm like, "You don't love me though." If you loved me, you would, you know, I would know.
Yeah.
So anyway,
community versus family. I mean, family is a sort of extreme,
whatever happened to just being friends? Being friends is great.
with benefits even. That's fine.
Yeah,
too.
oh yeah, absolutely.
This is, I love this whole sequence because there's that trope of oftentimes in crime fiction and noir fiction of the sort of the detective or whomever, the protagonist is having sort of a set of superpowers because of their other interests or whatever. And this is, you know, sort of kink superpowers. And at the end of it, the character even says, "I've had enough of your kinky tricks," you know. And, you know, Tate uses here this idea of, you know, taking inflammatory pills before being tied up so that as she sort of deflates, essentially, she can get out of her bonds. And then she uses hypnosis on Lester, which is just wonderful. That must have been a fun thing to play with in terms of the genre tropes.
Oh yeah, I definitely called up my friends who are into like really elaborate, inescapable bondage that lasts for days and involves like lots of really expensive gear. And I was like, let's say you were doing a scene where your sub was brat and was in a bratty mood, and they were going to try to get out of it. It's kind of an escape room with sex. And like, what do you think they would try to do to get out of inescapable bondage? And I just got lists and lists. I have Google Docs full of that. And yeah, erotic hypnosis is totally a thing. And, you know, it's a thing in cults, and it is a thing in kinky sex. Again, there's an overlap, and yeah, it was fun to just use all of these like real. I mean, when your job is fantasy exploration, then you like have a lot of great fiction tools at your disposal, and then knowing that they actually work and how they actually work is a lot of fun to play with. Yeah, and also really wanted to set a scene in a sauna.
I remember us talking about that and about your love of saunas.
I mean, I love them, and so I have some of my best ideas in them. And it's so I think that a lot of people know that a lot of cults use saunas and other like extreme conditions to make people pliable. But yeah, sometimes I'll be just like sitting in a sauna for a really long time and having like intrusive thoughts about like, what if there was a fight happening here and someone like smashed someone's head into the really hot rocks? And then of course there's the David Cronenberg movie Eastern Promises, which involves a very naked Viggo Mortensen.
Oh no!
Yeah, in a long fight, and I was just like. Even David Cronenberg's realism is inspiring to me. It turns out. So
was it fun to draw the increasingly sweaty characters in the sauna?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, you did
the enclosed space also.
Yeah. No, I loved the all the environments that you chose. The hot springs, the kind of abandoned hot springs, like little village. the mountains, the sex club, everything was just so much fun to draw. So
Yeah, you were the first artist that I collaborated with who used this technique where you actually like get like a 3D model made of.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, will you talk about that?
yeah, I don't know if I ended up doing it for this one, but occasionally this is just like a cool comic shortcut, I guess, if you have the budget for it, because you still have to pay someone to do it. But if I am working on a project where, let's say, the character's house is like a major part of the story, and there's so many scenes that take place within this house, or maybe a car. A car is a great example. I have so many little model cars, but because I hate drawing them. But
I did make Lisa draw most of an issue in a car.
But
it's a road trip.
yeah. But a cool thing that you can do is you can collaborate with a 3D artist and tell them, send them inspiration pics, send them sketches, send them all kinds of stuff. Be like, this is what I want the house to look like. And then you have a working 3D model that you can not only use to create your compositions and figure out like where your camera angle is going to be, or like try different, dynamic, arrangements or whatever. It's a great shortcut because perspective sucks to figure out. And if you have like an actual physical version or a 3D like digital version, it makes it way easier. So
That's not cheating?
yeah, no. There's no cheating.
No, it's like previs in movies.
I mean,
or
let's
like,
be honest. Comics is a ton of work, and a lot of times you are on a strict schedule, and anything that you can do to make sure the work is finished and looks as good as possible, like, I'm gonna say go for it.
Yeah.
I could imagine also that like you see that, and then you're able to, like Justin brought up your acting, right? Or
Yeah.
you were talking about it as well, like
Or directing, kind
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, it's really helpful for me in particular because I'm one of those people that I don't have like an inner visualization. Like if you know the thing where it's like picture an apple.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the word. But yeah, if I picture an apple, it's just I got nothing.
but I mean me too,
So-
that's why I'm a writer.
So it helps to have a visual starting point that I can shift and adapt and like actually see before I have to like try to sketch things
Does
out.
that help with
So-
lighting too? Can you light it?
Yeah.
Cool.
If
So you
you
can
have-
even see like
If you have the software and you can
Yeah.
pop it in there and then move your light source around and try
rad.
things out. I know it's great.
All's fair in love, art, and comics.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we mentioned a little bit sort of having fun with genre tropes, and I love these lines. Like why send a good guy to do a leather dyke's job? I mean, brilliant. And I'm not a liar, honey. I'm just a problematic bisexual. And it's great because you reference all these things as sort of elements of these exploitation movies in the beginning, which is I think one of the reasons why it's set in a video store, and then you get to actually play that out in this sort of meta way. So was that fun to write? Like
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean the thing about being a fan is that like I'm able to enjoy being entertained by something. Like my lizard brain can like watch a David Cronenberg movie and be like, and then like another, like an analytical part of my brain is like, that worked, that didn't work for me. I could queer that. And I'm like still, they don't, I think they actually like feed each other, like encourage each other. They don't like detract from each other. So, yeah, and again, I don't know, I like writing like hyper stylized genre fiction dialogue is very similar to being a fetish worker or being a fetishist. Like dirty talk is kind of like picking like what is I don't know, or just like having a sense of humor about things.
Yeah.
Like I don't even know if I could teach that, but it does. What I like about humor is that it is a lot like sex, and it's part of why they go together for me. It is about like making someone laugh and turning someone on is about intuiting how to like sort of psychically reach out and like affect their nervous system and like produce an involuntary response. So and that's like, for me as a writer, that's like that's what it's all about. And then it's fun because I'm disseminating and indoctrinating, and I'm like,
Your gay agenda.
yeah, exactly. I'm like, I know, like every day I wake up, I'm like, people are like being, I'm affecting everyone's nervous system, and I'm still in bed.
Yeah. Must have been fun to draw some of these moments too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you are definitely the master of the witty one-liner. So being able to, draw these characters delivering these sassy lines, I'm like, so fun.
And there's this sort of, I mean, the book has this moments of humor, and there's sort of a camp element to it, right? Where even the real drama and the pathos feels authentic and real, but then also like has a camp element, which feels very queer to me, because we queers tend to be sort of masters of taking trauma and drama and sort of, spinning it at the same time as acknowledging it. So, so was there sort of, do you feel like the camp here was sort of deliberate and, on both the visual and the
Susan Sontag says that you can't make camp deliberately.
Right, yeah, she's wrong. She's also wrong about sex, I think. Didn't she say or about pornography? She said that pornography was all flat.
Yeah, I mean, she contradicted herself a lot. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that probably also when you're queer, you just sort of like breathe camp. So it's fine. You don't have to think about it too much.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I will say there wasn't a conscious decision, but I also feel like this story, I mean, I think if it had been drawn by an artist that had maybe a more realistic style and less cartoony style, then maybe it wouldn't have had that as much of that campy aesthetic.
Yeah, because I mean the sort of sly, the sly look here with the sort of cartoony elements, like that's really pulls it, makes it happen. So. Cool. So speaking of which, I mean,
spoilers.
I mean, this is
Spoilers.
Spoiler alert. Yeah. But this must have been so much fun to draw. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and going from this sort of utopian fantasy and then into this horror.
Yes.
It sort of reminds me of Tezuka a little bit here.
Oh,
this
yeah.
Sort of, I mean,
I love horror. I love drawing grotesque, terrifying, brutal things. And I mean, I feel like everything. Yeah, like I'm glad that there was an opportunity at the end of this for that, because I don't think I knew where the story was going exactly. I think the outline had maybe, I don't know how specific you got in the outline. I don't know how specific you got in the outline originally, but I remember reading this issue and being like, oh shit, can't wait to draw this. So
yeah, I feel like maybe this is the part that upset people. Maybe sometimes people are like, oh, okay, it's explicitly sexy, okay, and then they're like, oh, and it's also ultra violent, and I'm like, I grew up on Vertigo, that's that's what warped my mind. So like body horror and like the pathos of really extreme things happening to our characters goes right along with sex for me. And yeah, I mean, it was just so wonderful to work with an artist and also work with Dead Sky and the editorial team. And
oh yeah, that's a good point. They were so supportive to let us do whatever crazy thing we wanted to do with this story.
Yeah, and having been censored quite a lot in my in the development of my work and and after publication as well, and in so many different ways. It's so refreshing when people are like, oh yeah, people. I mean, this is definitely the result of a lot of people who work with me. I think you made this joke also, were like, oh, there goes my browser history. But usually they're talking about sex. And but I definitely Googled what happens when a human is boiled alive.
Yeah.
I remember Googling some pretty grotesque
Yeah.
reference, and I'm like, cool.
Yeah. That's setting off some federal watch lists.
Yeah, there was this video. I don't remember who made it, but it was like a cartoon that like seemed it matched the other scientific things that I read. So I think that it was intended somewhat to be instructive, but it was also like grotesque, where like this sort of like anthropomorphic animals like are in like a pot of like a cauldron of boiling water, and all the stuff about your heart and your skin. And anyway, my nerves are just like fried from horror movies. So I'm like, what can I mean, I think we wanted to upset people.
Yeah.
I mean, I find cults very upsetting.
Yeah.
So
the cult leaders shouldn't have a happy ending at the end of the book.
No.
And this is a bit of a spoiler for the movie Saint Maud, but there is an amazing scene in the movie Saint Maud, which is the same director as Love Lies Bleeding. Recommend both of those movies.
Same.
There's this amazing scene in Saint Maud where a character self-immolates for the purpose of religious ecstasy. And there is this like ambiguity where you like see what she's experiencing in like reality maybe, but the whole movie has been like blurring reality.
It'll cut like I think there's like a hard cut where it starts with like her like epiphany, her ecstasy, her joy,
and people like worshiping her. Yeah.
And then there's just a hard cut to the actual reality of her self-immolating, and it's like definitely very inspirational to this scene.
Yeah, but that's also still ambiguous because it's like, okay, you might be
might be happening.
You might be screaming as you die, but also still believe that this is happening, that you're having this like
all these chemicals
godgasm
firing off in your brain, all these your synapses going crazy as you that could be what you are experiencing in that
could
moment.
be what you're after. Yeah.
A strange segue to questions from the audience, but that would be. But I'm curious.
On the topic of self-immolation.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Though I will just say that I find it interesting how horror, erotica, and crime also as genres all sort of structured similarly, because they're all about sort of building of tension and release of tension narratively. Anyway,
Totally.
Any particular any questions from the audience? Yes, in the back.
So, you mentioned Saint Maud. Almost every saint had some tragic story, right? And maybe most of them do have a cult following. So, are there personalities in the world that are just as charismatic, that you think would be dangerous enough to have a cult that maybe is hidden, subversive, and you could also explore in a future story?
You gotta repeat that.
Yeah, totally. I am Jewish, and everything I know about saints is just like, reading about like, weird, violent. Don't you have to be a martyr to be a saint? Yeah, that's all I know about the weird stuff. And I took like one like class on medieval nuns and like, masturbating to Jesus and stuff. But I mean, no, one of the things that a cult has to have is a charismatic leader. There's so much to explore about like the different kinds of charismatic leaders that we might form cults around in our modern world, or even the sort of like out of time anachronistic world of Deprog. And we do quite a lot of, we haven't talked about this, but we do quite a lot of skewering and satirizing of like California hippie culture, which after a decade of living in New York, moving back to California was like my biggest reverse culture shock. Being like, oh, I'm so familiar. This is like uncanny. I'm like so familiar with like why this smoothie is $14, but like, and I'm like disgusted by it, but I also want it. So yeah. And do you have any other ideas about like kinds of things that could be inspirations for cults?
I mean, not off the top of my head, to be honest. So
Did you really say that
Yeah.
kale is like the foundation of a cult? That's what I'm hearing from you with the
Listen, I think
California,
I think kale
I
is
guess
great.
if you
this movie.
spin a good enough story about it, anything can really become a cult. So
Absolutely.
Well said.
Are
Totally
there any
agree.
other questions? Yeah.
First I want to say, like, I love what you're saying about, like, competency porn versus consequences. I'm going through a couple books right now. It's like a bunch of straight guys doing a bunch of shit that's like, you can't do that if you're anyone else. What I was really interested in is, like, you talked about your pitch document and we're working through censorship. And also then I heard from you about, like, the issues weren't actually written yet before when you had your pitch document. I was wondering, how does that work with making it very clear, this is going to be queer, it's going to be erotic, it's going to be horror, but also how do you get it there past censorship?
I mean, in the case of both,
So just to
Oh,
like.
yeah. Please.
And I guess what is a pitch document for a comic?
Okay, so I think the question is about pitch documents and especially how they relate to queer content, erotic content, horror content.
I have been very fortunate that Dead Sky, the indie publishers who publish Deprog, and also Image, who I worked with on SfSx, have been incredibly supportive of the queer content, the sexual content, the body horror, the ultra violence, the be gay, do crimes. Pretty. I can't think of a single thing
that there's pushback on. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, me neither.
And so I'm very fortunate in that sense with those two publishers. I've experienced, like, from many other places, like, quite a lot of like gatekeeping or rejection, or just like not being allowed to make things the way that I wanted to. And then in terms of making that clear in a pitch document, I mean, I lead with it because I need to, before I get too involved, I like need my collaborators to know that I'm a sicko. If they don't know already. And yeah, I've had experiences where I'm like, you knew who you were hiring, so why are you surprised that this is some freak shit? Yeah.
And what is a pitch document? Yeah.
I mean, it really depends on the publisher.
It varies.
Sometimes people come to you. In this case, Steve once came to me. A lot of publishers will have like calls for submission on their websites, on their social media, or even if you go to a con and you meet them, they're usually pretty good about telling you what they will look for before they approve something or greenlight something. And we just did a guest teaching about beat sheets in a CCAD course yesterday, and so I can't emphasize like the importance of like pre-outlining, and like I'm a structure girly and a Virgo, so I'm like I think that it really helps for creativity, and it also really helps for the pragmatism and the business side, and even like the marketing side of being a creative professional. So developing the skills of being able to like, or even elevator pitch, but just sort of know like what's the like big shape of this, and like help people do their jobs, help publishers and editors and other people like do their jobs, and then they'll want to work with you because they know that they're not going to have to like work twice as hard to like get something good out of you, would be my advice.
thank you so much. This has been a really wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for
yeah,
all of
thanks
your
for
prep
Tina,
and
Lisa, and
thoughtfulness.
thank you all for coming.
Thank you for coming.
I'm Justin Hall. I'm at the California College of the Arts table at 127.
Oh, 117, 118. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
we
right.
are we are table.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
There you go. 119 and 120. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much for
and thank
having
you,
me.
CXC.
Thanks.
Fantastic.